Good day, students! Welcome to Teacher Sally YouTube channel. This is Rosalie Custodio, your grade 9 science teacher. In this lesson, you will recognize the properties of ionic and covalent compounds. At the end of our discussion, you should be able to identify what are ionic compounds and covalent molecular compounds and distinguish the properties of ionic and covalent molecular compounds. In this part of the lesson, let's try to find out what you have learned on the previous lesson. Identify which of the following compounds is ionic and covalent based on the types of elements combined. Write ionic if it is an ionic compound. Otherwise, write covalent if it is a covalent compound. For example, sodium chloride. Take note that sodium belongs to group 1A and is a metal, while chlorine is a non-metal that belongs to group 7A. Since it is a combination of a metal and a non-metal, thus it is an ionic compound. Another example is nitrogen monoxide. Nitrogen is a non-metal located at the group 4A, and oxygen is also a non-metal that belongs to a group 6A in the periodic table. Nitrogen oxide is a combination of non-metals. If your answer is covalent compound, you are correct. This time, it's your turn. Number 1, carbon dioxide. 2, ferrous sulfide. 3, aluminum chloride. 4, water. 5, glucose. 6, potassium iodide. 7, barium chloride. 8, nitrogen gas. Sodium hydroxide. And number 10, sucrose. You may pause the video to answer this. So let's answer. Number 1 is covalent, 2 is ionic, 3 is ionic, 4 covalent, 5 covalent, 6 ionic, 7 ionic. Covalent is for number 8, number 9 is ionic, and number 10 is covalent. Well done! This time, can you guess from the pictures given which is table sugar and which is salt? How are you going to identify which substance is sugar and which is salt? There is a wide variety of compounds, and most of these look physically the same as white sugar and iodized table salt. It would be easier to determine these two substances by tasting, but this method of identifying substances does not apply to other compounds, as some can be toxic. When sugar and table salt placed side by side, it may appear the same because they are both white crystalline solids. Sugar is a covalent molecular compound made up of sucrose molecules, while table salt is made up of sodium chloride ions. Tasting is the best way to identify the physical property of a substance, but it is not always a safe way because there are compounds that are toxic and poisonous. Now, these are the two common types of compounds based on their chemical bonding characteristics. So we have the ionic compounds and covalent compounds. Ionic and covalent compounds differ in their properties because the particles in each of these two compounds are held together by different types of chemical bonds. This time, you will understand the different properties of ionic compounds and covalent compounds. Let's have the properties of ionic compounds. First, they form crystals. Why do ionic compounds form crystals? Ionic compounds such as sodium chloride form crystals with a cubic shape. This is due to the structure of the ionic lattice. All ionic compounds form lattices and crystals when solid. The ionic bond formed when the cation and anions is very strong. The ions are arranged in a regular geometric structure called crystal lattice. Different ionic compounds have different crystal forms. Naturally occurring ionic crystals are found in rocks and minerals. They are mixed with transition metal elements to give rise to brilliant colors. Second is they have a melting point and boiling point. Why are ionic compounds solid at room temperature and have high melting points and boiling point? Ionic compounds have very high melting and boiling points. The ions in the crystal lattice are closely packed together, creating a strong electrostatic force of attraction between them. The more ions there are in the crystal structure, the stronger the ionic bonds. Therefore, a large amount of energy is required to overcome these bonds. Ionic bonds are strong and a lot of heat is needed to break them. Strong ionic bonds hold ions together. Larger ionic charges produce stronger ionic bonds, and so much more heat is required to break the ionic bonds in magnesium oxide than in sodium chloride. Next, they are hard and brittle. Why are ionic compounds brittle? Ionic compounds are brittle, they shatter when they are hit. Ionic bonds are strong, so why does this happen? When the lattice is heat, a layer of ions is shifted so that the ions with the same charges are lined up together. These like charges repel each other and so split the ionic lattice, causing it to shatter. Because of the strong electrostatic attraction between the ions, ionic compounds, therefore they are hard and difficult to separate. But ionic compounds can be also considered as brittle. For instance, when pressure or a mechanical force is being applied, like striking a hammer on the crystal, it will cause charges to move closer. This results in the electrostatic repulsion, which will be enough to split the crystals. Another property is they conduct electricity when dissolved in water. When ionic compounds are dissolved in water to form an aqueous solution, the cations and anions are dissociated or separated and are free to conduct electricity through the solution. These ionic substances that conduct electricity are referred as electrolytes. They are non-conductors of electricity in solid form. Solid ionic compounds do not conduct electricity. Instead, these are good insulators. This is because the ions are locked into its crystal lattice and ions cannot move out, so the solid cannot conduct electricity. Only ionic compounds in liquid or molten form or aqueous solutions are good electrical conductors. How can ionic compounds conduct electricity? As solids, ionic compounds cannot conduct electricity because their ions are bonded together in the lattice. Ions in solid state cannot move. When liquid or molten, the ions can break free of the lattice and are able to move. The ions are charged particles and so can carry an electric charge. Ions in molten state can move and conduct electricity. Ionic compounds are usually soluble in water because water molecules have a slight electrical charge and so can attract the ions away from the lattice. When dissolved, the ions are free to move and can carry an electric charge. Now let's proceed to the properties of covalent molecular compounds. First, they have low melting points and boiling points. The covalent bonds between atoms are quite strong, but the intermolecular forces, the attraction between molecules, can be relatively weak. The addition of a small amount of energy separates these molecules easily. Therefore, they have a low melting and boiling points. Next, most covalent compounds are soft and flexible. This is because covalent bonds are relatively flexible and easy to break, which causes molecular compounds to form gases, liquids, and soft solids at room temperature. However, there are exceptions, primarily when molecular compounds assume crystalline form. Another property, they are flammable. Covalent compounds tend to be more flammable than ionic compounds. Combustion is a reaction that releases energy when the compound reacts with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Many of these molecular compounds that undergo combustion contain hydrogen and carbon atoms. They are not conductors of electricity. Ionic compounds dissociate into ions when dissolving in water. Ions are needed to conduct electricity. When dissolved in water, covalent compounds separate into molecules rather than ions, so it is typically don't conduct electricity. And lastly, they can be classified as polar and nonpolar molecules. Covalent molecular compounds can be polar or nonpolar. The polarity of molecules results from the differences in the electronegativity of the bonded atoms. Electronegativity is the ability of an atom in a molecule to attract shared electrons towards it. This time, let's proceed to common ionic compounds and their uses. Potassium iodide, iodized salt used for thyroid health. Sodium fluoride, an ingredient in toothpaste that helps prevent cavities and tooth decay. Sodium bicarbonate, baking soda used in baking and as an antacid to reduce stomach acid, treats indigestion and upset stomach. Sodium hydroxide, Used as a cleaning agent, it is the component of soap and detergents. Barium chloride, used in making fireworks, releasing the green-colored explosions. Moving on, covalent molecular compounds, or simply covalent compounds, are substances that are formed from the chemical combination of two or more non-metallic elements. In a covalent compound, atoms of the different elements are held together in molecules by covalent bonds. Here are the list of molecular compounds and their importance. Methane, an odorless, colorless gas used mainly as fuel to make heat and light. Ammonia is used as a refrigerant gas for purification of water, supplies, and in the manufacture of plastics, explosive textiles, pesticides, dyes, and other chemicals. Ozone is a gas that occurs naturally in trace amounts in the stratosphere. It protects life on Earth from the harmful UV rays of the sun, but this gas is toxic to living organisms at ground level. Carbon dioxide, it is an essential gas for plant and animal processes like photosynthesis and respiration, but the excessive amount in the atmosphere is unsafe as it is greenhouse gas. In the industry, carbon dioxide in liquid and solid form is used as a refrigerant in fire extinguishers. And water, it is one of the most important substances perhaps in the universe. Water exists in the three states of matter and is essential to life. Processes as our body needs water for all cells, tissues, organs to help regulate body temperature and maintain bodily functions. It is also essential for daily and domestic use. Water also plays an important role in the balance of the ecosystem. Let's apply. Which substances will conduct electricity? Let's try copper. Metals can conduct electricity because the sea of the localized electrons are free to move anywhere in the structure. Next, NaCl solid. Ionic substances cannot conduct electricity when solid because the ions are bonded together in the lattice. NaCl liquid. When liquid, ionic substances can conduct electricity because the ions are able to break free of the lattice and carry a charge. Next is diamond. Substances with covalent bonding do not conduct electricity because all the outer electrons are fixed in shells. To check your understanding, answer the following. Write your answer in a notebook. Classify the following properties as either ionic or covalent compounds. Number 1, usually occurs between metals and non-metallic elements. 2, there is sharing of valence electrons between atoms. 3, conduct electricity when in solution but not in solid phase. 4, usually occurs between two nonmetals. 5, poor electrical conductors. 6, crystalline solids. 7, hard and brittle materials. 8, can be classified as polar and nonpolar. 9, high boiling and melting point. And number 10, held by covalent bonds. You may pause the video to answer this. So that's the end of our lesson. I hope you learned something new today. Watch out for the next video lesson in science. Answer the questions and activities in your module appropriately. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This has been your teacher, Rosalie Custodio, saying, learning science is fun, cool, and awesome. Until next time, students, thank you for watching and have a nice day.